Evening, everybody. As usual, I want to welcome everybody here. If you've not done so yet, click subscribe and like for the video so you get notification. We do occasional ones that are not on Sunday evenings, so they let you know when they show up. We're going to start this evening in the book of First Timothy, chapter 1, verse 4. And this is continuing in our series on Baal. But neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies which minister questions, rather than godly edifying which is in faith. And in the NET Bible, nor to occupy themselves with myths and interminable genealogies. Such things promote useless speculations rather than God's redemptive plan that operates by faith. So there is some contention about the specifics in this verse, but they all basically say the same thing. Stick to what is profitable when it comes to godly things and make sure that they're edifying. Take heed means to hold to, not just simply to hear. You have to follow through on it. The things that are not edifying are referred to as fables and endless genealogies. Well, what does that mean? Well, Harlan Ellison, a science fiction writer, once called himself a paid liar because he made his living by writing fiction. However, is fiction truly writing? Sorry, is fiction truly lying? Not really. The Bible is truth, and we're always told to speak truth and reject lies. But fiction is simply a made up story. But does that mean it's a lie? Well, the Bible itself contains fiction. Does that mean the Bible's untrue? No, it just simply means that the Bible uses literature that would fall into the category of fiction in order to relate truth. In other words, it's storytelling. For example, the prophet Nathan gives David a fictional story about a man whose only lamb was stolen and killed in order to convict David of his crime. And we're going to look at this event at some point in the future, but it's deeper than most people take it at face value. Technically, David did not commit a single sin under the law, but spiritually, he broke every single commandment. And then the story itself contrasts the letter of the law to the spirit of the law. And please don't take me to task for this statement in the comments here because we're going to be covering it thoroughly in the near future. Uh, but in Judges chapter 9, Jotham uses a fable to convey a message. Ezekiel uses allegory in Ezekiel chapter 17. And Jesus is the greatest storyteller of all, not only hiding spiritual things in parables, but even using brilliant plays on words in the very sentence structure in order to convey even deeper meanings. Now, fiction has to have some basis in fact, otherwise, it's senseless. These senseless fictions might be popular with the hippie drug culture, but not for most people. Most fiction contains a lot of factual elements. It describes a world that's familiar to people in order for them to relate to it. Often it contains reference to very specific real events in order to create the backdrop for the story. Science fiction, good science fiction at least, relies on realistic events and realistic science in order to present a story. Without that realistic backdrop, you get some of the movies of the 50s and 60s that are great to make fun of, but they're not exactly great cinematic presentations. Now, what we're going to get to later is exactly what is realistic in these stories and what is fiction. That is where people can easily be seduced and deceived. Satire is both a literary device and a literary genre. It generally involves literal truth more than ordinary fiction because the real world is often the target of satire. Sometimes satire is for commentary, sometimes it's simply for entertainment. But satire uses humor, sarcasm, ridicule, irony to make a point. Gulliver's Travels is a good example in which satire was used as political commentary. Now, the book was actually really biting political satire, but the movies were simply changed into something that was made for kids' entertainment. So read the book if you want to get the real satire in that story. It was this biting commentary that the author of this book, Jonathan Swift, had to remain anonymous in order to avoid persecution and perhaps prosecution for what he said. And as an interesting side note to this story, the book was published in 1726, And in it, Gulliver visited Laputa, which was a floating city of crazy scientists who told him that they had knowledge that the greatest scientists back home didn't know. And the book describes that Mars has two satellites. The nearer one is 3 diameters away, and the outer one is 5 diameters away. The nearer one revolves in 10 hours, and the latter one in 21 and a half hours. Well, scientists discovered the two satellites of Mars in 1877, which was a century and a half after this was published, and it was remarkably accurate where its orbit was. Now, Swift claims that he did not simply make this stuff up, but he got it from ancient knowledge. Now, while this is not applicable to our current study right now, since uh, we're studying deception, it does have current application in that it's a sort of an object lesson in deception. Another example of satire is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, in which he satirizes social institutions and customs in Western society. Political cartoons use satire very heavily. Even Alice in Wonderland is not really a children's story either, it's political satire. But satire is not parody. Satire tries to provoke thought, parody simply tries to invoke laughter. Now, genuine satire reveals its fictional content as distinct from its factual content. The fictional content is presented to amuse by violating expectations, and humor helps you remember things. But the non fictional component is not an attempt at being funny. However, in the modern world, there are many who use what is supposed to be satire in order to deceive people. If a writer uses false assertions that are unamusing, it can be taken as part of the factual basis for the work by many people who lack awareness. And if somebody points this out, then they're brushed aside as not understanding satire. It is not really satire, it's a lie. This is more effective, especially if the work does contain falsehoods that no one would take seriously. Now, through this means, what is presented in these stories is presented as satires, but it's simply a means of deceiving through deliberately false statements. Through this means, a lie is called satire and many are deceived. But remember, our government would never do something like this. Now, as our society becomes less and less able to think and to analyze, our entire society becomes more susceptible to this tactic. It's not an accident that our education system has been watered down to the point that it's not very useful anymore. But fiction can be used to reveal spiritual truths. John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress is fictional, but it's one of the most biblically based books ever written. Bunyan anticipated criticism because of fictional words, and he proactively stated that some men, by feigned words as dark as mine, make truth to spangle and his rays to shine. C.S. Lewis has written many fictional stories with allegories that reveal spiritual truths. There's no conflict between the Bible and fiction as a genre. Now, not every fictional story that a Christian writes, reads, or watches, or whatever must have an overtly Christian message. But Colossians 3, verses 1 through 2 tells us that we need to set our thinking on things above. And then Philippians 4:8 tells us that those things that are true, honest, just, pure, commendable, lovely, excellent, and praiseworthy, so that we can have core biblical values without an overtly Christian theme. Now, remember, many of the Bible stories that have a positive moral message are pretty dark and full of sin. They're full of destruction. And as we've been studying for many weeks, they're full of demonic forces. But we must focus on godly things if we are to overcome in the end. And that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be overcomers. Now, we mentioned C.S. Lewis above, but another author, J.R.R. Tolkien, he despised Christian allegory. He was a Christian, but he didn't like Christian allegory. He was good friends with C.S. Lewis, but he didn't even like his works because he didn't like the Christian allegory. But he himself produced non-Christian fiction that unintentionally had a spiritual message. He wrote the Middle Earth books as an allegory of war and the downside of technological advancement. And due to his underlying core Christian beliefs, they were full of plots with biblical values such as courage and self-sacrifice. In short, it's okay to use fiction, but whether you're making spiritual allegory or simply entertaining others, you still need to apply biblical guidelines. And Christian readers and viewers need to use biblical discernment. All fiction contains an element of teaching, and as Christians, we should take that very seriously. Now, back to our beginning verse in 1 Timothy 1:4. Neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which minister questions, rather than godly edifying, which is in faith. What this verse is talking about is getting involved in unedifying controversy over conjecturing. Now, some conjecture is necessary. We're given models in the Bible. We're not given a rule book. Now, some of it is rule book, but a lot of it, we're just given models to apply to our lives. But that conjecture needs to be edifying. Genealogies are tremendously important in the Bible, but this phrase, endless genealogies, they're not edifying. This may refer to the Gnostic series of emanations from the divine unity, or perhaps the legitimate Old Testament genealogies that are interpreted allegorically and they have fables added to them, or it may simply be referring to family affiliation as a matter of pride, or a combination of the above. Now, I mentioned Gnosticism. Gnosticism is a collection of religious ideas and systems that emerged in the late 1st century AD. And what the Gnostic beliefs do is they emphasize personal spiritual knowledge, which is gnosis in the Greek, but they emphasize this over actual orthodox teachings. It generally views the material world as being flawed or evil, created by a lesser divinity, and seeks salvation through direct knowledge of a hidden supreme God. God didn't hide himself from us. But the foundational ideas for Gnosticism are not far off the mark, but where they took it is way out in left field somewhere. The outworking of Gnosticism is pure heresy, and it contradicts foundational biblical doctrines, even though it started out with sound foundation. Now, the adjective useless, or translated interminable in the NET, has the sense of object or aim. In other words, the list goes on and on and on, and it's not something that's edifying. There's no object to the list of names. So this entire concept goes together. It's fables and endless genealogies. Two concepts are tied together with one conjunction. Fables are not merely fiction. Fables are words or speech, or the subject of those words or speech. It's rumors, sayings, or historic fiction that's treated as truth, such as the myths concerning those in Hades that are written about in Plato's Republic. One use of this concept would be taking a work of fiction and treating it as if it were real. People do that all the time. People have no discernment anymore. The rabbis had supplements that they added to the law. They treated them as if they were legitimate parts of the law. People will take allegorical interpretations where there's no allegory. They'll take fabrications. Like the rabbis just completely made up some of their doctrine. But this also happens in the modern church doctrines, and they use it in order to keep people in line so that they can maintain control over the people. Secularly, we might call these ideas old wives' tales, and religiously, we would call them false doctrines, which may border on doctrines of demons. Now, 1 Timothy 1:4 is not warning against fiction as a genre. It's warning against getting embroiled in controversy over extra biblical conjecture that's not edifying. It promotes useless speculation. Things such as the color of Samson's hair, which is actually something they argued about at length. I didn't know that until recently. Who cares? They discussed whether or not the angel Raphael really exists, or how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Philosophically, there may be nothing wrong with these things, but we have to beware letting them become divisive and detract from our stewardship that we've been given responsibility for, and never let a preference or an opinion become doctrine. Fiction is fine. False doctrine is not fine. Now, stated above that Harlan Ellison called himself a paid liar because he writes things that he knows to be false in such a way that they're presented as being true. That's realistic fiction. But as we've seen, fiction does not fit the definition of a lie. To lie is to make a statement that you know to be false, but you're making it with the intent to deceive people. With fiction, you make false statements, but normally it's going to be expected that readers and viewers will identify fiction as being fiction, and therefore they won't be deceived. Now, there are famous exceptions to this. Back in, I think it was the 1930s, there was a radio program called War of the Worlds, and this is before the days of TV. And at the beginning of the program, they came out and said this was fictitious, that it was just a drama. But it tells a story about how these aliens were invading the earth and they were coming to the town and this and that and the other. And the people ignored the warning at the beginning and they took to the streets armed to go confront these aliens that were attacking them. It became a big deal. But we looked at the example of people who use satire to intentionally deceive people. The War of the Worlds thing was not an intentional deception, but people will use this to intentionally deceive people. That crosses the line between fiction and lying. Both lying and fiction require false statements to be presented in such a way that they're presented as being true, but one is for deception and one is for entertainment. With fiction, it would be expected that they know that it's fiction, but with a lie, they have no such expectation as that. Now, studies have shown that people are more likely to believe a lie than they are to believe the truth. Sometimes it's simply in the way that it's presented, but there seems to be an inherent bias in people. Psychological operations that are perpetrated by governments and other large organizations will use this in order to embed misinformation and disinformation in society. Have you ever noticed just how many so-called conspiracy theories turn out to be reality? But this is not proven until years or sometimes decades later when it's too late to hold anyone accountable for bad actions. They will use things such as presenting unbelievable conspiracy theories in order to discredit legitimate ones or to discredit the people. Sometimes the lies have been so embedded that even when it's exposed, people still believe the lie. In many cases, people are deceived because they want to be deceived. And I think that sometimes that is how the deceiver, Baal, by whatever name you call him, deceives so many people. They want to be deceived. So is something fiction or is it a lie? The difference comes down to the purpose of the false statements. With fiction, the context is usually defined, such as it's called a novel. But with a lie, there's no context. People use it just to deceive people. Matthew 24:4, and Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. Take heed that no man lead you astray. Have you watched the TV show The Chosen? It's a historical drama that's based upon the life of Jesus and those who knew him. And the Roman presence is important in this. And there's storylines and backstories and everything like that. From what I gather, I watched one episode and I watched a clip from another one, but it started out being written in the style of Luke, who got his information about 20 years after the events took place, and they apparently changed it around to now get the views of all the Gospels. It didn't really grab my attention when I watched it. I wasn't offended by it. I just wasn't entertained by it. But there's been a lot of controversy surrounding it because it's claimed that it doesn't follow the Bible verbatim. Well, that's the very nature of historical fiction. You take the literal framework of history and you create stories surrounding it. For example, you might want to write historical fiction about the 7 Years' War, and specifically the French and Indian War part of it. And so you create a romance story about an Abenaki princess and a British officer and the conflict that presented in their lives and those around them. And the story is purely fictional. They're probably not even a real Abenaki princess and British officer involved, but the historical part of the story is real. And you might say, well, that's a lie then. No. If you simply wanted the history, there are many history books. You can read all the history that you want about this, including political commentary about the events that led up to it and all the ramifications. This would be a fictitious story that's presented for entertainment. And it would only become a lie if somebody tried to put that into history books. By the same token, the one episode of The Chosen that I saw involved a discussion that involve Jesus and Nicodemus surrounding the events in John chapter 3. We're going to read John chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. For no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except God be with him. Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born from above, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus saith unto him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time into his mother's womb and be born? And Jesus answered, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I said unto thee, You must be born again. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest not the sound of it, or thou hearest the sound of it, but canst not tell whence it cometh, and whither it goeth. So it is every one that is born of the Spirit. Nicodemus answered and said unto him, How can these things be? Jesus answered and said unto him, Art thou a master of Israel, and knowest not these things? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, we speak that we do know, and testify that we have seen, and ye receive not our witness. If I have told you earthly things, and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of heavenly things? So the dialogue in the show had a lot more conversation than this. And I don't remember the specifics of it. It's been a while since I saw this. But it involved Jesus persuading Nicodemus by saying things like, Remember when I said so and so? Or remember in the scriptures when it says such and such? In other words, it fleshed out the entire scene for entertainment. Myself, I've often thought about how Jesus and the 12 are always presented as being formal and stiff and speaking as if they were on a Shakespearean stage. In my head, I thought, this is a bunch of young men hiking around, camping, and fishing all over the place. And they probably just talked. They didn't speak like Shakespearean actors, they spoke like buddies. And somebody probably told a dad joke and he got punched in the arm for it or something like that. Well, that's historical fiction. And it's presented as mere speculation and thought and is not intended in any way to detract from the biblical narrative. Well, the scene between Jesus and Nicodemus was attacked viciously by several preachers that I saw. You know what their complaint was? That discussion isn't in the Bible. That discussion is a lie. It's false doctrine. No, it isn't. It's historical fiction and speculation. Now, I don't personally know those people who are making the show, and I don't know their hearts and their motivations, but from interviews I've seen, they seem to be sincere, and in no way was I offended by them fleshing out the scene. Without doing that, it would simply be a different group of people quoting the scriptures, which is fine. But is this historical fiction of this type, is this a problem? And I would have to say both yes and no. If you're well grounded in the Bible, you can sit back and you can enjoy it unless something that's truly heretical is brought out. For example, with the parables, it would be fairly simple and enjoyable to make them into a little drama or novel or something like that. The lesson would stay the same. And of course, the specific Bible wording in the Bible is important and necessary, but it can make a good object lesson. But what about somebody who doesn't know the Bible very well? Perhaps this TV show is their primary or perhaps even their only exposure to the Bible story. Recently, my wife was talking to a young man who was about 11 years old, and he made the comment that it was a good thing that Matthew was sent to collect back taxes from Peter or arrest him, or Matthew would have never met Jesus. My wife looked at him and said, Where did you get that idea? Well, it turns out that it came from The Chosen. And like I said, I've only ever watched one entire episode and part of another, so I may get the details of this story wrong. But apparently the account in the story went something along the lines of Matthew was a tax collector, which he was, and Simon Peter was behind on his taxes, so the authorities sent Matthew to collect them or to arrest him and throw him into prison. And so then Peter caught the 153 fish in order to pay the taxes, and it was just enough to pay them. It's entirely historical fiction, and it's an entertaining idea. If you know the scriptures, that's not a stumbling block. If you don't know the scriptures, It might be a stumbling block. This young man thought it was part of the Bible narrative. God can use whatever means he wants to make coincidences happen. And coincidences, when I use it, is always in quotation marks. God may just put the urge in Matthew's head, and I think I want to go down to the seashore today. Or he may have had the officials send Matthew to collect back taxes. The Bible gives us what we need. The rest is entertainment that can be used to fill in the narrative. But is it a problem? I don't have a clear answer to that because somebody who's well grounded knows the difference. At the same time, it's easy to see how this type of activity could be used by the deceiver to deceive millions. No force would be needed. Satan and the demons who serve him, they will not use a lie when the truth will work. Therefore, we need to be diligent in discerning the truth. John chapter 8, verses 31 through 32. Then said Jesus to those Jews who believed in them, if you continue in my word, this is Logos word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And then John chapter 18, verses 37 through 38, the first part, Pilate therefore said unto him, art thou a king then? And Jesus answered, thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. Pilate said unto him, what is truth? And we looked at this briefly, at this truth and this use of truth here. But I think it would benefit us a bit more to take a little bit deeper look at truth because we're going to be confronting more truth as we go along. What does it mean to say that something is true? What does it mean to say the Bible's true? Miller's Law states that to understand what someone is saying, you must first assume that it's true and then determine what it is true of. And this is from the theory of communication here. He also observed that the number of things that an average person can hold in working memory is about 7 plus or minus 2. When a person says something that seems odd or wrong, don't say that's wrong. Start from the position that it's right for them and talk to them in ways that will make sense to them, and this will help you make sense of what they say, and then you can correct the error. Or they may correct your error, but they could go either way on that. But instead of attacking, try to understand. When speaking of truth, there are 3 kinds of truth. There's logic truth, reality truth, and then there's opinion. Aristotle said that some people don't listen to a speaker unless he speaks mathematically, others unless he gives instances, while others expect him to cite a poet as witness. So there are 3 types of truth. Logical truth would be deductive reasoning. This is represented by the Logos. Things are deduced from reasoning. It's a top-down reasoning. It is a form of abstract symbol manipulation. Then reality truth uses scientific real-world examples, and it is empirical reasoning. It's bottom-up reasoning. It's natural. It uses observation and experience rather than logical reasoning. It uses traditional fact from science and models. Then your opinion truth is doxa in the Greek. It's where we get our word doxology, which means that our opinion is that God is right and holy and just. This would be taking the word of witnesses, actors, politicians, sports figures, preachers, pastors. This is why preachers have to be very careful with opinions and why I will always do my best to tell you when something is strictly my opinion. I may have one slip out. I apologize if I do, but I always try to make it a point to say this is just my opinion. But opinion truth is basically anything that is not reality or is not logical truth. And this model can be applied in many different areas. For example, there's statistical truth. Logical statistics can approximate things but doesn't exist in the real world. Reality statistics would be empirical statistics that is simply past history and experience. Opinion statistics is completely subjective. When studying the most dangerous jobs, logical statistics pulls in some obscure probabilities for things such as sewer diving, which is a real job that I wouldn't want. Reality truth shows that commercial fishing is the most dangerous job in the world, but when polled, human opinion is split between firefighters and police officers as being the most dangerous job. Travel is another example in which people perceive flying to be dangerous because it's spectacular when it fails. Logically, the most dangerous form of travel is motorized vehicle transportation, but reality shows that walking is the most dangerous form of travel that you can do mile for mile. Logic says that it's a six pack. Reality is that it's 12 ounces each. And opinion is that it tastes great or it's less filling. You may not be old enough to get that reference, but if you are, I hope it makes you laugh because it's accurate. But in all of these, areas can overlap. But sometimes the distinctions are useful when you're discussing things. But it should be noted that although logical and reality truth often have a lot of overlap, human opinion truth may simply not be connected to either reality or logical truth. Now, in both Hebrew and Greek, the words for truth are that of reality and not of logic or opinion. Truth simply speaks of what is. Thomas Betterson, who was an English actor and a theater manager in the 17th century, said that actors speak of things imaginary as if they were real, while you preachers too often speak of things real as if they were imaginary. Do you know preachers who are like that? Actors will take an imaginary world and make it seem real, at least the good actors do. Preachers too often tend to take a real world and make it seem imaginary. They will take things and turn them into allegory that should be literal and say that things such as the sons of God going into the daughters of men really refers to sons of Cain and daughters of Seth, and they weren't really monsters. Or they will pretend that this sin doesn't exist or that it doesn't affect you. You're good just the way you are. You just need to put a little bit more in the collection plate. Many preachers are actually actors in disguise. And biblically, that's the way that the word hypocrite is used. In modern English, hypocrisy is do as I say, not as I do. But biblically, hypocrisy is simply putting on a pretend show like the Pharisees did. You can't determine what someone is thinking unless you've been married for a very long time, and that's why I sleep with one eye open. But normally, you can't determine what somebody is thinking. Therefore, you have to compare what they're saying with what God is saying. If a person believes wrongly but acts righteously, they're a danger to nobody but themselves. However, a deceiver would want to change what people think God is saying so that a comparison would be avoided. Yea, hath God said. The Pharisees were not hypocrites in the modern English sense of the word. In Matthew chapter 23, verses 25 through 26, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. Have you ever tried to wash the inside of a bowl but not wash the outside? I tried it once just to see if I could do it because of this passage right here. It can't be done effectively. Now, your hands might still have stuff on them, and when that happens to me, my wife complains and then either re-washes the dish or she puts it back for me to wash again. But the inside's clean. And if you clean the inside, the outside is clean, mostly. In this verse, the outside is clean, but the inside's dirty. That's easy. You don't even have to try to do that. Therefore, it's easy to see this verse is not to be used in a literal sense. Now, in the Bible, the word hypocrite is used reflexively. What that means is it can apply to the person who's speaking also. In the modern sense of do as I say and not as I do, that's always applied to somebody else who's on the outside looking in. This is a rule to them, but not to me. This sense is implied for our interpretation of the way Jesus uses it, but this is not what the word means. To not be a hypocrite in the modern sense, the rule has to apply to the one making the statement as well. But, and this is a big but, as was pointed out, in ancient times, this word had to do with one who is an actor who is acting out a story that may or may not reflect reality. The truth that Jesus speaks is a reality truth and not simply logical truth, and certainly not opinion truth. When he calls them hypocrites, he is calling them actors or pretenders. And our passage about cleaning the platter and the cup, which works better, the ancient usage of the word or the modern? Are the Pharisees saying one thing and doing another? No. They're saying that one should make the outside of the cup clean, and that is exactly what they are doing. That's not hypocritical in the modern usage of the word. Jesus is telling them to get in touch with reality, telling them to get in touch with truth. First, you clean the inside. That's the part that's important. And then the outside will take care of itself. Which one's more important to you? Which is more important to society? How can this attitude be used to deceive people? Perhaps your WWJD bracelet is a bad idea when you're in a bar fight somewhere. Or a church that has a very strong expectation that you're going to be dressed just the right way, are people going to give you the side eye? Many of these scenes can even be used as plots for TV shows or movies. They're entertaining. There was one Columbo episode, if you're old enough to remember him, in which Johnny Cash played a religious country singer who was clean on the outside, but he murdered his wife, who was blackmailing him. Pretty good story, but pretty pharisaical too. Now, logical truth uses math and information values in order to create generalizations that may involve paradoxes, incompleteness, and things which can't be decided. Sometimes that's all we have to work with when we're applying biblical principles in new and unexpected circumstances. Reality truth involves that which is reality. It does involve probability, statistics, and some unknowns, but what we know to be real is the basis of reality truth. Every time X happens, Y is the result. That would be a reality truth, even though it may occasionally have an exception. For example, you can't walk on water, but sometimes you can. Now, opinion truth can also be called human truth. Humanity's gone insane, so human truth has followed suit. Human truth can be whatever one or more humans decide that it is. There's no precise rules for defining what human truth is, and human truth is not necessarily logical truth or reality truth. Human truth may be wrong. Human truth is, which is the best fast food restaurant? What is the best brand of car? What's the best ice cream flavor? Do you like black olives? And let's not even get started on pineapple on pizza. Those are all human truths, they're opinion. Optical illusions are a perfect example of human or opinion truth and may be affected by either your mind or your eyes. I'm going to show you some optical illusions here, and I'm going to post links to the photos below. But I want you to look at them and how your mind and how your eyes can deceive you. The first one here, which monster is the big monster and which monster is the little monster? They're both the same size. This picture is drawn intentionally to be deceptive. The way that it's drawn makes the one in the front look a lot smaller, even though they're both the same size. It tricks your mind. What do you see here? Do you see squares or do you see circles? I want you to download this one and look at it, but once you see the circles, you're going to have a hard time unseeing the circles, even though it looks like squares at first glance. In the third one, this is a black and white photo. Download it and look at it. These are all ways that your mind can be deceived. Your brain can be deceived, your eyes can be deceived. It all has to do with deception, not reality. You have to look at it for the reality. Now, secular law, the laws of the land, is human opinion. The foundation of Western law is based upon man's interpretations of God's laws, but we've gotten away from that foundation. But when dealing with the law, at least with the sound law, with what we started out with godly law, you have to understand what logical truth is with the law is if the law is on your side, you pound the law. This is the letter of the law. This is what has to happen. The reality truth is if the facts are on your side and the law is not on your side, then you pound the facts. That's the spirit of the law. Then the opinion truth is that if neither's on your side, you pound the table. You get really loud and you try to demand your way about it. This is lawlessness, and this is where our society is today. Now, in United States law today, we're more about following rules, such as rules of evidence, legal rules, guilty or not guilty, and things such as that. In the founding of our nation, the law was supposed to determine the reality truth of whether or not a person committed a crime. Anything that harmed no one but the individual was not generally considered a crime. And any crime that was repugnant to the United States Constitution could be nullified. All these things were based upon their interpretation of things that God said. The first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, said that on questions of fact, it is a province of the jury. On questions of the law, it's a province of the court to decide. But it must be observed that by the same law which recognizes this reasonable distribution of jurisdiction, you have nevertheless a right to take upon yourself to judge of both and to determine the law as well as the fact in controversy. On this and on every other occasion, however, we have no doubt you will pay that respect which is due to the opinion of the court. Whereas on the one hand, it is presumed that juries are the best judges of facts, it is on the other hand presumable that the court are the best judges of the law. But still, both objects are lawfully within your power of decision. This is what's called jury nullification, and has been used throughout our history to acquit someone who violated the letter of the law. But the jury found the law itself to be repugnant. God's law is perfect, and it is summed up in the two verses that tell you to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Western law was founded upon God's law. And it was not perfect because it was developed by man, but that was the intent. And at any time that the court strayed from those principles, anytime the court strayed from godly biblical principles, the jury could say not guilty, even if the letter of the law had been broken. Now, Western culture has followed in the footsteps of King David and has legalized things that are repugnant to God and destructive to society and they've supported the criminals. Now they break the spirit and the letter of the law and they go free. The spirit of lawlessness is here. It follows the return of the false gods. Human truth has created a tyranny by the lawless, and it's demonic. Logic truth does not work with people who don't think logically. And reality truth doesn't work with those who pretend that reality does not exist. The Greek word for truth is aletheia, and it literally means not nothing or not oblivion. And think about that in relation to the discussion between Pilate and Jesus. And read it again here. John chapter 18, verses 37 through 38. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? And Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice. Pilate saith unto him, What is truth? He's saying that I should bear witness to the not oblivion. And Pilate asked, What is not nothing? Doesn't make sense in English, but if you read it and look at the words, it makes sense. And then in chapter 8, verses 31 through 32, then said Jesus to those Jews which believed on him, If you continue in my word, the Logos, are you my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. If you continue in my word, you shall know the not oblivion. In other words, that's what it's all about. The words are precise, but they have a cloud of meaning that is different than the way we tend to use it in the modern world. As believers, we are of the not oblivion. And I hope that makes sense to you. It's in writing, it makes sense. In speaking, it may not make sense. To be unsaved would be oblivion. We're no longer unsaved, we're saved. So we are not oblivion. That's reality. Reality is how we defend the Bible truth. We don't defend the Bible truth simply by some mystical faith, which is a belief that is merely based on a feeling. That's not what faith is. Faith requires putting your beliefs into action. Bible truth can be defended using concepts of information, computation, languages, history, science, and the Bible itself. And people will shout, the Bible is truth. The Bible is the true word of God. The truth shall set you free. You probably heard people say these. They probably pounded on the table a few times when they said it because that's all they had to back it up. And you may have even used them yourself. Now, these are all true statements, but we must understand truth. And how do we know the Bible is true? And many people will use verses out of context, or they will use reasoning that doesn't withstand the test of logical reasoning or even reality. And that makes these arguments appear to be nonsensical to non believers, or may even appear nonsensical to other believers. And pounding the table, that doesn't help things. It ends up being detrimental to witnessing and helping others. Modern reasons that involve computation, information, and linguistics can be helpful, but they're not widely known or used. And you may say, I don't need those things. I have faith. Well, those things were used by a few important people in history, such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, Jesus, Paul, John the Apostle, the writer of the fourth gospel, who may or may not have been the Apostle John, and others. And these examples are often not understood, but these people all use logical reasoning to present truth. But because they're not understood, people will often ignore anybody who uses these arguments in establishing the truth of the Bible. Logical truth can be used to explain and to expound upon God made reality and truth. Reality is reality. You can use logic to expound upon it. Paul himself used Greek logic, often using Aristotelian terms, to promote and defend the truth of the Bible. Computation can be used, languages, science, secular history. I know of several physicists who converted from atheism based upon reality and logical truth. These areas are where the deceiver is going to attack believers. Will you be prepared? Are you helping to prepare others? Are you out there somewhere in left field that you're not going to be believed? It's a phrase that's used frequently and it's misused frequently, but it's valid. It's in the Bible. But you must put on the whole armor of God, and you need to know how to use it, including the sword of truth. Be prepared to give a logical defense of your beliefs and not simply an emotional one. Learning and teaching can't be separated. A teacher teaches a student, the student learns from the teacher. Sometimes a teacher can learn from the student. A disciple is someone who learns from the teacher. Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 2. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, the word for teach in this verse is the Greek word didasko, and it's where we get the English word didactic, which has to do with instructing or moralizing. Now, some people find it oppressive because they don't want to learn and they don't want to be moralized, so they use it derisively, but it's not a derisive word, it's a positive word. In Matthew 7:28, and it came to pass when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished. They were amazed at his doctrine. And the doctrine is didache, which is teaching. In Matthew 28:19, go ye therefore and teach. This is the word mathetesute, which is make disciples of. But go ye therefore and teach all nations. Nations are ethnos, or people groups. Go and teach all people, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Some things can be learned without being taught. Other things require being taught because they can't be deduced through reasoning. That's the idea behind this word, and this word is where we get the English word mathematics. If I want to replace a part on my motorcycle, I can learn the process by picking up the book, the manual. But before I do that, somebody has had to teach me how to use the tools. With logic and reasoning, we can use reality to present the truth in the Bible, but that means we must not put human opinion into it. Otherwise, we will not only look foolish, we'll be foolish. We must use the sword of truth, and these truths are still applicable today. Some of the results would have been incomprehensible in the past. There are technology statements in the Bible that would have not been possible or even comprehensible 200 years ago. Today, we have computer programs that write computer programs. Just as creation in the Bible is described as they created after their own kind. We looked at some optical illusions earlier that can deceive the eye and the brain. And how might the deceiver use our eyes and brains to deceive us today? The list is long, and we're going to cover them in this series or elsewhere on this channel as we go along. But we must not reject reality, or the truth that we are presenting will be rejected. Don't try to make the Bible say anything beyond what it actually says. For example, the Bible doesn't tell us how old the earth is. It doesn't tell us how old the universe is. Science can determine that. Science may not be correct. But there is no such thing as settled science ever. Science is always changing. Science is always about questioning and pushing and prodding. But what the Bible teaches is that the universe and the earth had a beginning. This concept contradicted settled science at the time that it was stated. And the Bible states that the universe was created by the one true creator God in successive steps. Man fell, and the rest of the story of man's redemption is throughout the rest of the Bible. Time had a beginning, and time will have an end. And although it's difficult to comprehend, or maybe impossible to comprehend, God currently exists outside of time, and we will exist outside of time also if we're part of the family. Time is meaningless when you're outside of time. But reality is how we defend Bible truth, not simply some touchy-feely emotional belief that we pound on the table about because we believe it, therefore it has to be true because we believe it. Faith requires putting your beliefs into action. Bible truth can be defended using concepts of information, computation, languages, history, science, and even the Bible itself. It's self-correcting code. This is also how the Bible and Christianity and Christians will be attacked. This is how God's people will be attacked. There's a one world religion that's coming. It's going to roll all the false religions into one big umbrella, and everybody will adapt or else. Satan doesn't want atheists. He wants spiritual people who can be deceived. All the false religions say that Jesus is a way. They don't want to replace Jesus, or they don't want to eradicate Jesus. They just want to add false worship alongside Jesus and then slowly subvert him until he's no longer recognizable. Oh, yeah, that Jesus guy, he was okay, but he only pointed the way to our truth. That's not truth. Jesus is the God man, he's God in the flesh. When Jesus and when God was removed from our society, man still had a need to worship. The worship of the one true God was replaced by worship of another being, a very charismatic and appealing being, the self. Israel turned to Baal, we turned to Baal. Idolatry is ultimately the worship of self. Do you want power? Do you want money? Do you want fancy houses, fine food? People turn to idolatry because they worship themselves, and it's a means to an end. Now, most Americans would never admit to being idolatrous. In other countries, they do, although they may call it something else. But in America, there's enough of a remnant of morality that most people would deny it. Even many atheists consider themselves to be spiritual, although I don't know what they think that they're talking about. I know what spirit they're talking about, but I don't think they do. But many worship aliens, even though they reject God. Now, there's no such thing as aliens from another planet, but I think it's likely that these demons will present themselves as such. Most of the so-called alien encounters can either be debunked or they're demonic manifestations. And that's going to come into play in the future. But when America turned from worshiping God, it started worshiping culture, or at least the things within that culture. Substitutes for God had always existed. They were not something new, but they had always been rejected. They were rejected until God was rejected. Once the one true God was rejected and expelled, the emptiness could be filled with any of a number of false gods. God is truth, and when reality truth is gone, opinion truth is embraced. Philosophies, causes, ideologies, fill in the blanks. No matter how irrational, these new truths are beyond challenge. They are the new gods, and you better bow down before them or else. And we know that they're not new in an absolute sense, but they were new to the culture at the time. People had forgotten about them. They had been exiled. If you don't bow down before these gods, then you're going to be canceled. Increasingly, you'll be imprisoned. These are gods of political correctness, wokeness, pride, a long list. Worship of God was replaced by worship of false gods, and if you choose not to participate, you'll be forced to participate. Hell, preacher, those aren't religions. Anything that takes on the form of a religion is a religion. Britannica defines religion as human beings' relation to that which they regard as holy, sacred, absolute, spiritual, divine, or worthy of special reverence. It is also commonly regarded as consisting of the way people deal with ultimate concerns about their lives and their fate after death. These are all new religions. They worship the false gods that have returned, and this worship has turned the entire culture into a vulgar cesspool. Remember our study on drain flies? How the sewer pipes were running under everything, and that's where the believers were now, where the Christian church, the visible church is. Our culture became crude. The entertainment became increasingly carnal. Behavior, even public behavior, became profane. Things that used to be kept behind closed doors were just out in the streets. And the entire motivational drive was pure hedonism. But how can this all be perpetrated? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. This is taken from the NET Bible. The arrival of the lawless one will be by Satan's working with all kinds of miracles and signs and false wonders, and with every kind of evil deception directed against those who are perishing, because they found no place in their hearts for the truth so as to be saved. Consequently, God sends on them a deluding influence so that they will believe what is false, so that they will believe the lie. The spirit of Baal will alter the very perception of reality. With one God, there is an ultimate and objective reality. It's a standard by which all can be discerned and judged. There's truth. When there are many gods, there are many truths, and those truths will be contradictory. Therefore, there is no truth, at least as far as society is concerned. As believers, we know that there is still objective truth, but society has rejected that truth, and it's utter chaos. There's 187 genders. I was born a man, but you must accept that I'm a woman, and I'm going to beat up your daughter out there wrestling. There have even been stories of people marrying animals, and I read one story of a woman who married a tree. In such a culture, there's no more truth. When you create an idol, you create a new truth, and it's a false truth. That sounds like a weird statement, but think about it. It's a false truth. Your personal reality is altered from objective reality. If one person says that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and the other person says that 2 plus 2 equals purple, one of those things is wrong. But you better believe that both are true or you're going to be canceled. You're going to be in trouble. If Baal can turn a culture away from objective reality, then that culture is easy prey. Everything in society has become subjective. If you point out something that's irrational, the answer is don't oppress me. Whether you like beef or not is subjective, but you can't argue that beef does not come from cattle, although they've now introduced fake meat, which is really big in some groups. This subjectification of reality moved into our language. The ability to communicate effectively is the foundation for civilization, but the language changed to reflect this false reality. Orwell called it newspeak. The new reality is that you can be whatever you declared yourself to be. The language is adapted to fit this concept. And if you disagreed with it, then reality had to be altered to fit this new personal reality. Reality must not contradict the new personal truth, the false truth. Without God, there's no truth. Without truth, there is no reality. The language is altered. What was wrong is now right. What was right is now wrong. Black is white. White is black. Values were altered. Reality was altered. People were altered. Value, standards, and morals that made Western civilization were eradicated. Civilization was once built on a firm foundation, but that foundation has been washed out. And how did this happen? You can point to a few specific events, but in this country, through presidential executive orders and votes by legislators that removed all these safeguards that founded our society. It's a stroke of a pen. And the people didn't rise up and demand the foundation be restored. They fell for the lie that Christians should remain silent on all things political. Even many non Christians, including prominent atheists, understood that this was the beginning of the end for the culture. Thousands of years destroyed by the stroke of a pen. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, but that's not true. The truth is that there is no sword. We didn't use our sword of truth, and we kicked out the ultimate sword along with the one who wields it. Any belief, religion, culture, or civilization that denies the existence of absolute truth will always contradict itself. Therefore, by necessity, it will become its own truth. If you can turn what is truth into something subjective, then you can turn that which is subjective into truth. And this was a sign of the deceiver. This was a sign of Baal. Idolatry is taking nothing and turning it into something absolute. When America exiled God, we created new truths, we created new laws, and we created new commandments. The Ten Commandments were the very foundation of Western law, and now they are banned in courtrooms. Now, some courtrooms are beginning to fight back, but there are also some that are turning that itself into a form of idolatry, which makes a complicated situation. But this is something that needs to happen. America took apostasy and they declared apostasy to be truth. And if you don't bow down, you'll pay the price for that. It's something simple to see the idolatry of polytheism, which is the belief in many gods. Even with the return of the false gods, we have the three main players, two of whom we've spoken of, but we have untold numbers of lesser gods. But our culture has also turned to pantheism, which is the belief that everything is God and anything is God. This is even widespread within the visible church alongside New Age and New Thought doctrines. And in this pantheistic belief, there's nothing other than the material world. The world is God and God is the world. Have you heard that in church? Sometimes I think those within the professing church are more dangerous than those who are outside of it. It's the enemies within the gates that throw open the gates wide to the enemies. And it's all called new something, new age, new thought, new speak, things like that. But it's the same old paganism that's been refurbished and repackaged for a shiny new world. These isms often reject the belief in the one true God, but they will call on the spirits to help them, sometimes by name, sometimes not. But this is even done within the church. I played a video of a prayer of a woman doing that a while back. And have you ever heard of a preacher to ask to pray or at least sing good thoughts or something along those lines? I've heard it many times, and it's disgusting. But most of these isms practice pantheism, including within the visible church. Some of these things are embedded into our collective consciousness, and they're only acceptable religions in the political climate. The political climate says we have to reject religion, but they push the religion of secular humanism on us. They push Gaia worship on us, which is the most visible of these. Even that's not new. Part of Baal worship was also nature worship. He was a god of increase, which at the time involved nature because it was an agrarian society. At the same time that apostasy took off in America, nature worship started. And that was not a coincidence. God commands us to be good stewards of the planet. And perhaps we fail at that miserably. But we're not to worship nature. In Haiti, in their struggle to survive, they destroyed nature. It's a desperate situation there. But not knowing where the next meal or where the clean water is coming from, recycling that plastic bottle is not going to be high on the list of priorities. In the Philippines, the beaches are covered with trash. In Guatemala, some rivers flow with plastic trash. And in America, they virtue signal by wrapping a paper straw in plastic and say, I'm saving the planet. That's Gaia worship. Now, I posted links to these videos below. These are supposed to be videos. I couldn't get them to play here. I apologize about that, but I did post links below, including one from Haiti, in which there's a program that's been set up to pay people to clean up the trash. Taking care of things is what we're expected to do as Christians, but we're not to worship nature. The entire idea behind pantheism is that man is nature, nature is God, man is God, God is everything. Even nature worship is pantheism, and it all comes back to worship of self. And all the plastic in the environment may be contributing to the current situation of gender confusion and the future population collapse. And I don't think that any of this is a coincidence, and we may talk about that next week. But even the lines between men and animals has been crossed. And again, the last time it was the fallen angels that did that. This time we're doing it to ourselves. This is Baal. Baal, as we have seen, was shown both in human, animal, and chimera form. This was normal in pagan religions. It was left over from the Nephilim the first time they showed up. In Genesis 1, God created all the different groups of animals and told them to reproduce after their own kind. Naturally, animals not after their own kind cannot reproduce. But with angel technology, they could. And now, with technology that man has, those lines have been crossed again. Where did man get that technology? The artists have depicted these chimeras throughout the centuries based upon either traditions or memories, but now we're creating them in reality through science. Using genetic splicing, we have put animal DNA into plants, DNA from one distinct species into another, human DNA into animals, and animal DNA into humans. This is all Baal. And where will this all lead? We're not told specifically. We can only speculate, but it's not good. It makes popular movies, and those movies may be part of the problem. They're very rarely presented in a bad light. But this all started under worship of Gaia. Think Earth Day, which is 100% pagan, in which animals were given rights. We can kill unborn babies on a whim, but animals are sacred. The animals are worshipped. Man and animals have been mixed, and all of society has been corrupted. All distinctions are now gone. There's no more reality. There's no more objective truth. Not even much logical truth is left. Death and life have been switched. Male and female, human and animal, good and evil, right and wrong, all gone. Baal. All because the creator and the creation has been merged. All distinctions are now meaningless to the world. If the world is broken and the world is God, which is not, this is pagan belief, but if the world is broken and the world is God, it can't repair itself and everything is hopelessness and despair. There's no meaning because God is lost and redemption is not possible in such scenarios. This is all Baal. This leads to despair. And I'm not saying this just in order to be a Debbie Downer. This is said as a warning to the world. As believers, we know that we have a better future and we have a hope of one day ruling and reigning in the coming kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 11 through 12, but thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Fight the good fight of faith. Lay hold on eternal life. Lay hold on Ionian life, whereunto thou art also called and hast professed a good profession before many witnesses. Excuse me. This is our command. Flee these things, all sorts of stuff previously spoken of in these verses, and follow after righteousness, follow after right living, follow after godliness or piety, faith. Faith is belief put into action. Follow love. This is agape love. This is selfless love. Follow patience or endurance and meekness. Now, meekness is not weakness. Meekness is power under control. It's gentleness. A weak man is a useless man, but a meek man is a good thing. We're to fight the good fight of faith. And to win any battle, you must fight as if you're already dead. We're to die to self, and we're to live for Him. To lay hold on Ionian life, which is life in the age to come. This has to do with rewards. It has to do with ruling and reigning with Him. This is where we're called. Many are called, but few are called out. And we're to have made good our confession. Did you walk the walk, or did you just talk the talk? People are watching. We know hard times are coming. We're to be watchmen. We're to warn others. And this is not meant to be depressing. This is meant to prepare us. We can find joy through Christ in all that we do. In the past couple of weeks, we've left a few loose ends. We're going to try to tie up those loose ends next week and then continue on. I want to fill in the imagery in the Passover feast that we had to skip due to time constraints. We're going to talk more about plastic and the environment and how it ties in with these studies and end times prophecies. We're also going to look at some of the ways these things will be brought about, such as predictive programming and other psychological manipulations. I also want to look briefly at how even the church participates in much of this deception in order for the church leadership to maintain control and power instead of letting God be in charge. But I do want to leave you with one last positive thought. This Psalm chapter 17, verses 14 through 15 from the NET Bible. Lord, use your power to deliver me from these murderers, from the murderers of this world. They enjoy prosperity. You overwhelm them with the riches they desire. They have many children and leave their wealth to their offspring. As for me, because I am innocent, I will see your face. When I awake, you will reveal yourself to me. It's the day I'm looking for, and I hope you are too.